Hello, I'm Chris Burns, and welcome to The Network, where we connect into a matrix of newsmakers to get to the heart of an issue. And watch out, they've got to answer in 25 seconds or less, or else. Let's take a look at that issue right now. The groundswell of anger has spilled into the halls of power. After a financial crisis many blame on high-flying, highly paid traders for some of the world's biggest banks, politicians are finally cracking down on the millions in bonuses paid out to champion speculators. Many believe it's high time those banks that were deemed too big to fail and bailed out by taxpayers need to put their traders on a shorter leash. They demand limits on bonuses that had fed the financial market frenzy to the point of near collapse. Even bank shareholders are starting to demand those limits. Swiss voters recently approved a referendum limiting bonuses. The vote was seen as a backlash against the excesses that triggered the crisis and cost many their jobs. The backlash across Europe is also fueling demands for a financial transaction tax to help pay for any future bailouts. But can Europe impose those measures without losing business to competitors who won't sign on to that idea? How many of those highly talented bankers could pack up and move to Singapore? Now, wired into this edition of The Network is here from the European Parliament in Brussels, Karel Lannoo, Chief Executive Officer at the Centre for European Policy Studies, or CEPS. Also from the Parliament, Othmar Karas, European Parliament Vice President and Rapporteur of the legislation that includes limits on bankers' bonuses. He's also a member of the EPP group. And from the Euronews Bureau in Brussels, Guido Ravoet, who is Chief Executive of the European Banking Federation. Let's begin with a question for all of you, starting with Karel. The plan so far for this banker bonus limit is to keep it to a full year's salary, that meaning double salary plus what would be the salary again. Does the limit go far enough or too far? And what would the impact be? Karel.
I mean, this limit for me is not that important. Banks can adjust their salaries rapidly, kind of the fixed salary rapidly upwards, just to make sure that they can stay within the limit. For me, the most important thing is that this is not addressing the cause of the crisis, it's addressing a symptom. And as long as banks are too big to fail, banks will continue to pay high bonuses. Okay,
Othmar, how do you see that?
What needs to be clear, we don't take away money from anyone. We don't tell anybody how much they are allowed to earn. You are totally clear. It's not the key point of the regulation for the banking sector we have done.
Okay, Guido, do you think too much of a thing has been being made out of this banker bonuses?
Well, I think that remuneration is, first of all, the role of shareholders of a bank. We agree that legislation puts principles like long-term performance being aligned with the risk profile of the bank, but it should not be up to a legislation to go in the nitty-gritty of bonuses.
But will this break the gambling mentality, as is referred to by MEP Sven Giegold, who's part of the Economic and Monetary Affairs Committee on the European Parliament? What do you think, Othmar? Do you agree that with Mr. Giegold that this will break the gambling mentality?
It's the first time to regulate the balance between fixed salary and variable remuneration. But I think it is necessary to have more fairness between the banks. And it's important for our citizens. There is no way to explain to the people in Europe why such big bonuses are paid in the banking industry, while at the same time taxpayers' money is used to save banks.
Okay, Karel, do you think this will break the gambler's mentality?
I think also to a very limited extent, because there will be enough ways to get around. And if you're not a bank, you just try to be a hedge fund and you do basically the same things as you did in the bank, but you're not a bank, so you don't fall under the regulation.
Okay, but then also some argue that if you don't have an agreement on a global level about these bankers' bonuses, it's not going to stick. What do you think, Guido?
Well, that's one of our major concerns, is extraterritorial impact of this legislation. Especially with regard to subsidiaries of European banks outside the European Union. And there will be an unlevel playing field compared to the local banks for the attraction of talent.
Okay, but do you really fear that they're all going to move to Singapore, Othmar?
For me, it is totally clear This European regulation for all banks in the European Union and of the European Union must be one of the next initiatives of the European Commission.
Okay, Karel, what do you think? Do you think it should be a global agreement?
If they could do it, but I don't think there's any purpose on doing this on a global level. I mean, it's even a question whether you can enforce something like this outside the EU. If a bank is working through a branch in another country or through a subsidiary, there is no way that the EU can enforce what should be the level of salary over there. That is out of question.
But that is a mistake. That's not the level of salary. The salary is in the hand of the owners. The salary is a question of the competence and of the personality and of the function. It's only a balance between the salary and the remuneration, the variable.
Guido, do you think there will be a lot of bankers moving to Singapore because of this?
Well, there will be some activities that will be reallocated, for certain. But the problem is the unfair competition within the other financial centers between subsidiaries of European banks and other banks in, as I said, the war for talent. And that is the key issue.
Okay, now let's switch over to the financial transactions tax, or what some people call the Robin Hood tax. 11 EU countries have signed on to this FTT. That could raise more than 50 billion euros a year. Do you think that they could really raise that much, and do you support that, Othmar?
Yes, I'm one of the supporters of the financial transaction tax, but for a global regulation. Firstly. Secondly, for a European regulation. Thirdly, for a regulation in the Eurozone. The 11 member states who accept it in the moment are not enough. And so we have to go forward. Okay,
Karel, what do you think?
I'm against, let's say, I don't think it makes any sense, certainly not to do it with 11, but even at the level of 27 of the EU, it would be extremely difficult to enforce it.
Okay, well, what if we got a global agreement?
Well, then we could eventually do it, but even then, let's say, we would have to study the consequences very carefully. And I would like to remind you that when the Commission did its own impact assessment in 2010, it came out against it. And now it's trying to be in favor of it. So I suspect there are other reasons behind, amongst others, that the Commission wants to have an own share of it, its own resource, through this financial transaction tax.
IFAMA, the European Fund Association, says such a tax could, quote, reduce the attractiveness of savings and long-term financing in Europe. What do you think, Guido?
Well, it's certainly part of the image Europe has as a financial center.
It's got an image problem.
Yes, of course, and I totally agree with Karel. It's unrealistic to think that the US will accept this tax.
Othmar, do you think it's a dead letter if the Americans and the British don't support it?
We have to discuss it, but for us it's very important to have more fairness. All people who have a banking account have to pay tax. And so we say it is a question of fairness to have also a transaction tax.
One last question very quickly is, do you think that if the European Union pushed through a financial transactions tax and these banker bonuses, could that be another reason for British voters to vote for the referendum to get out of the European Union? What do you think, Karel?
I don't think so, because the financial centre and the city is only a very small part of Britain, and there also in Britain, let's say, strong resentment against the bankers. So I don't think it's a reason to act against this. Although some people may think this financial transaction tax is something entirely illogic to do.
Okay, Guido, what do you think?
The British are much more interested in having the economy on the right track again, and that will be the issue, I think.
And Othmar, do you think this is dangerous? Could it anger British voters even more?
No, I think it's not the key point. The key point is we have to stabilize the European banking sector. The question is the competitiveness of the European banking sector. And that is what we have done in the European banking regulation. I cannot see that these individual aspects can be a way out from the European Union. The United Kingdom has some taxes, different kinds of taxes, but with a different name.
Okay, Othmar, thank you very much. Thanks to all of you. I'd like to thank our guests, Karel Lannoo, Othmar Karas, and Guido Ravoet. I'm Chris Burns, and until next time, thanks for connecting with The Network.